following the discussions on, first of all, the PDP-8 and then DPP-A, and I think this third panel can nicely contribute, nicely complement to what has been discussed earlier in the morning. My name is Philipp Munzing. I'm the program director of the GIZ Energy Program, which has been supporting MOIT and other government partners here in its energy transition policy developments over the last 10 years. And I'm happy to moderate today's panel. With me today, I have Mr. P. Roy, Vice President of Power Systems, Schneider Electric, Rasmus Sorensen, long-term advisor of the Danish Energy Partnership Program, here also working with MOIT, and Mr. Chandan Singh, Country Managing Director of Hitachi Energy. Welcome, distinguished panelists, to today's discussion. So before we jump into our panel discussion and also address your questions, I'd like to set the scene. So general objectives of today's discussion is to really raise awareness again, first of all, on the main challenges of grid development, especially here in Vietnam. We'd like to explore what can be optimized, what can be enhanced, what is the condition of current grid assets, and what are technical features, technical elements that would help to further integrate renewables in order to build a sustainable electricity system here in Vietnam. So let me start first by showing you this slide. This slide shows you the global annual investment, power capacity and grids over the last decade worldwide. And you can see while power capacity has been growing worldwide, and in the green bar last year 600 billion of the 750 billion made renewables, so an all-time high on renewable investments last year. The investments into grids has been quite flat. Yeah? So I think this should serve a bit as a wake-up call that we need to catch up with grid development and grid investment in order to let renewables into the system. There's quite striking numbers also from the IEA that say that last year 3,000 gigawatts of that 1,500 gigawatts in advanced stages of renewables have been queuing because of grids not being able to connect them. So I think we can all agree that grids play a pivotal role in the transformation of the power system to enable seamless integration of volatile renewables. But still we have inadequate progress of grid development that poses a huge threat to electricity supply and therefore to economic development. And thirdly, we still have to deal with extensive time frames, extensive lead times for grid project execution, which again results in delays of essential upgrades. Transmission lines, new ones, easily taking up to 10 years to be implemented. So with this, I would just like to show here PDP-8's expansion plans on transmission grids, on distribution grids, on substations, on high voltage direct current lines to be built up over the next 30 years. Just as a framework also for today's discussion and to remind you that huge plans are ahead in Vietnam for enabling a sustainable electricity system. So we'd like to focus today on PDP-8 grid expansion, targets and investment needs. But then again, especially having also technology providers here on our panel, assessing the current condition of transmission and distribution networks and technical requirements related to balancing, storage, delivery, but but then also what role public-private partnerships can play in order to boost grid development and management. As you know, there's some legislative developments ongoing on that end. So with this, I would like to start the discussion by asking our first panelist, Mr. P. Roy, Vice President of Schneider Electric. Please kindly introduce yourself, your company, followed by the question on how you currently assess the grid situation in Vietnam, especially with regard to the different components.
Okay, thank you very much, and good morning to all of you. Myself, as Philip was saying, my name is P.I. Roy from Schneider Electric. I'm based here in Hanoi, new to Vietnam. I think some of you know Schneider Electric, but for those of you who don't know Schneider Electric is providing solutions for energy and digitization. And in Vietnam, Schneider has been there for almost 30 years. So next year we'll be celebrating our 30th anniversary. Especially in 2021 was a big year for Schneider because we were awarded as the most sustainable corporation by Corporate Knights. So it was a big recognition of the work that we do in sustainability. So we provide energy and automation digital solutions for sustainability and efficiency. Of course, in Schneider, sustainability is not just another business. Frankly, we have made sustainability as the core of our strategy. So whatever we do, how we do, and why we do, everything is centered around sustainability and efficiency. So yeah, I mean, efficiency is a big topic today. And we see that even in Vietnam, that many customers are realizing that efficiency is, let's say, like the unsung hero to achieve sustainability. Because when we talk about sustainability or efficiency, we very often think about the supply side. We don't think much about the demand side. So what's happening now is that awareness that efficiency can deliver for the sustainable growth. So coming back to this topic, of course, there are several challenges that we have today on the distribution network. The integration of renewables, I think it's quite known to everybody, the challenges that was faced in Vietnam. It's not yet fully resolved. It is still on the way to getting resolved. Philip mentioned some of the statistics in the introductory slides. I think with the penetration of EV and things like that, the distribution grid is becoming really complex. So what can we do in order to lay the foundations to manage this complexity? So there are a few things that can be done. One, of course, we need to continue to make the investments in renewable energy. Over time, some of these constraints will be sorted out, but if you want to have a sustainable grid, there is no other choice but to continue to invest in the renewable energy infrastructure. So be it solar, be it wind, storage solution, et cetera, et cetera. The second thing is really to make the distribution grid smarter. And by smarter, we mean you really need to implement smart technologies today to manage this complexity. More smart meters, more sensors, more automation, all of these are really key if you want to manage the complexity of the distribution grid. And of course, Schneider provides many of these solutions today in the market. There has been a lot of discussions and talk by EVN here to see how they can implement some of these smart technologies or smart grid technologies on their network. And then, of course, the other point that we need to look at is how can we modernize and upgrade the distribution network. So why? Because if you don't modernize, if you don't upgrade the network, you will not be able to manage the losses. So by doing timely interventions to upgrade the network, to modernize the network, you can drastically reduce your losses that's happening on the network. So that's another angle that needs to be taken care. And of course, demand side management. So this is another topic that, as I was mentioning before, when we think about efficiency and sustainability, very often we think only on the supply side, but there is a lot of things that can be done on the demand side to encourage people to have more sustainable practices in the way they operate their day-to-day operations, be it an industry, be it an hospital, be it a hotel, be it any oil and gas facility, for instance. So a policy support to encourage the consumers, the large consumers of electricity, to move towards more sustainable operations is another foundation that can be laid, and that can help us to move towards a more sustainable and greener grid. So, of course, the distribution grid is at the center of this energy transition. So I believe by putting in place some of these steps that I was mentioning, it will be possible for Vietnam to move faster towards sort of some of the ambitions that has been set in the PDP-8 and after.
Thank you, Roy, for your first insights, mainly touching upon distribution. We keep on hearing a lot in Vietnam at the moment when it comes to transition, and especially transmission costs, different necessary components in order to ensure that renewable energy that is currently being centered in certain parts of the country can be transmitted to other parts where it's strongly needed, and then in the next step to further be shared among the entire country. Chandan, I'd like to invite you to share a bit more on your views, being especially involved as a technology provider on transmission grids. How do you assess the current transmission infrastructure, and what do you think are aspects that should especially be prioritized over the next years? And please start with an introduction of yourself and your company. Thanks.
Thanks, Philip. I'm Chandan. As Philip mentioned already, I'm representing Hitachi Energy on this forum. Hitachi Energy comes out of ABB Power Grids. ABB Power Grids have been here for almost 30 years now. We are going to celebrate our 30th year anniversary on November 28. We are, as Philip mentioned, a technology provider for transmission grid, and we have been providing that solution to Vietnam and the ASEAN region from Vietnam. Regarding the state of the grid, or what is my or Hitachi Energy's assessment of Vietnam grid at the moment, let me start by going back on Philip's slide on the amount of investment that is being done on transmission side. There is a very similar slide from MOIT which shows how much money is being spent on transmission network in Vietnam as well for the last 6-7 years. And it's very, very clear that although the remaining amount of investment in power generation, distribution, everything else is going up, the transmission cost, surprisingly, is going down. Maybe this is not known, but in 2017, 2018, EVN NPT, the company responsible for transmission network in Vietnam, was spending 80 to 85 Vietnam dong per kilowatt hour in transmission. If I'm not mistaken, last year it reduced to around 70. So that shows the reduction in transmission investment from the cost point of view. Going towards the state, we know that Vietnam has taken a lead in the last 4 years by adding substantial renewables, both onshore wind as well as solar and rooftop solar. At the same time, majority of this is placed in central and the southern region, making those regions power surplus, and at the same time, north is not power surplus. This year, in the month of June, from June 1st to June 21st, before the rainfall started, north suffered blackouts. Our factory in Bakanin Industrial Zone had 10 days of power cut, not consecutive, but yeah, we were getting notice from NPC that, okay, tomorrow onwards you are going to have 24/7 power cut or 24 into 2 power cut. World Bank has estimated the loss to the economy in excess of 1.3 billion US dollar. This happened even though there was sufficient power in the southern part of country, which could not be even used in the Bakanin zone. Again, because of the lack of power transmission line. On July 10th, Honorable Prime Minister made the declaration to speed up the Circuit 3 from Kwangchak to Phonoi, if I'm saying the right word, to bring more power from central to the north. That transmission line 3 was supposed to be built by June 2025. The Prime Minister has instructed MOIT and EVN to finish it by June 2024. Hopefully, that should reduce the challenge on the grid in the northern side by then. I hope I answered the question. Otherwise, I can go on.
Thank you very much, Chandan. Our third panelist today, Rasmus, from the Danish-Vietnamese Energy Partnership Program. Rasmus, what strategies can be employed to enhance the stability of Vietnam's power grid? And what are some of the key learning points from DPP3's program on this over the last years? Please start with sharing your more information about your program, then answering the question. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Philip, and thanks to the organizers of today's very nice event. So my name is Rasmus Munk Sørensen. The Vietnamese prefer to call me Ramos, and that's fine. I'm working here as a long-term advisor to the DEP3 program, the Danish Vietnamese Energy Partnership, and we've been working now together for 10 years between the Danish Energy Agency and the Ministry of Industry and Trade, MYT. We're working on 3 main different topics. So the first one is long-term energy planning scenarios. Every 2 years we do this report called the Energy Outlook for Vietnam. Some of you may have heard of it. And we do this together with our partners here at MYT and AREA. We also look into offshore wind and how to fulfill the goals in the PDP8 on offshore wind. And secondly, we work a lot with MYT on integration of renewables into the grid and how to do that efficiently, and trying to pass on experiences learned in Denmark, where we have quite a lot of wind. More than 60% of the annual production now comes from variable renewables, wind and solar, mainly wind. So we're trying to teach them, and also NLDC, the National Control Center, we are working a lot with them. The last thing that we're working on is actually energy efficiency. So we fully agree with you, Roy, that it's super important to look at, but that's not really my area. I have a colleague who's working on that, also together with MYT. So some of the questions or what you're asking is what is actually the main strategy that should be employed for the grid in Vietnam, and that's a really good question. I think it would be useful to think about it and break that into maybe a few sub-questions. So the first one I would ask is, why is it we need this much more grid? And when you look at the numbers that you showed from the PDP8, it's clear that there's a huge need for investments into the grid, and it can seem like a tremendous obstacle. But I think it's important to remember that if we go back and look at the last 20 years, Vietnam has developed from using less than 10 terawatt hours in year 2000 to today getting close to 300 terawatt hours. So I really think that's very impressive. It's been a truly impressive development. And yes, now that needs to be done again. But it's, while doing that, I think it's important to understand grids being not a goal in itself, but a part of a solution. So why is it we need more grid? Well, we need that for producers to get in contact with their consumers, of course, and for the consumers to have cheap, reliable electricity. So that's the main purposes. And while grid can supply a lot of that, it can also be supplemented by other solutions. Better operation, better forecasting of the grid, having some requirements to the equipment that is connected to the grid. That can mean you can utilize the grid more efficiently while still maintaining a high degree of security of supply. So that's some of the measures that we're looking into a lot together with MIT in the DEP3 program, how to make more efficient use of the existing grid. That doesn't mean you don't need investments, but it helps to reduce the amount you need. Then the second question I would ask is, well, when we do need investments, so the investors, those who are going to invest in the grid, do they have the means? Do they have the capital required to invest in it? Do they have the incentives required for it? I think that's that's a big question, and that's a very important question to ask. And this is where I think maybe later we'll start talking about bringing in private partners for investing. But this is truly a key question to address, because I think we can all agree that it requires quite a lot of money put into this. Last thing I would suggest to ask and look at is, what are the hold-ups for actually constructing the grid? There's quite a lot of processes, I think. They are everywhere, but I think also in Vietnam, where some bureaucracy or some rules are causing quite a lot of delays and going back and forth. So that can be problems with procurement of land. That's an issue for renewables, at least. I think it's also an issue for approval of grid. It can be tendering processes when you are purchasing grid equipment. What are the approval processes? Everything in the whole line, from planning and saying we would need this project till it's actually operational, looking through that and saying what is causing all the delays. Because even though Vietnam has been very efficient, I'm sure there could be a lot of efficiency gains in the process going through it. But yeah, so that's my few cents on that.
Okay, thank you, Rasmus. Continuing with you, perhaps you can start and then invite the others to add. Talking about the requirements for getting renewables connected to the grid. What do you see as essential requirements for grid connection in general, but especially given the current situation and the upcoming years in Vietnam?
That was for me again, yeah? Yeah, right. Yeah, so this is the first thing that I was kind of alluding to just before. How do we maximize the value of the grid? How do we ensure that consumers get reliable electricity and cheap electricity? And one of the things we're looking into quite a lot is the grid codes, the connection codes. So this is basically, maybe I can use a bit of an analogy here, because not all are probably working in detail with the power system. So it's a bit like if we, for the transportation sector, you say, okay, we want to reduce the amount of accidents we have, or the amount of money we spend on people getting hurt in traffic. What you can do is you can throw a lot of money after ambulances and hospitals, and making sure you take care of people once they're in an accident. Or, and maybe a mix of the two is better, you can make some rules for how people behave in traffic. You can tell them to wear seatbelts, wear helmets, stop for the red light, etc. And enforce those rules. In combination, that's probably the most socioeconomic, cost-efficient way. And the same kind of applies to the electricity system. So what we are doing in Europe and in Denmark also, because we're part of the European Union, is that we have some pretty strict, but also quite easily understandable rules for if you want to connect, if you're a photovoltaic cell of a certain size, above 400 kV, there's a limit, and then you have to live up to certain requirements. And these requirements increase in complexity the bigger you are. But that also goes, they have the same here in Vietnam for generation, but they don't have it for demand. And there could be also a stronger enforcement of some of these rules. So that means that if you connect a new factory or something that uses a lot of power, today what will happen is if there's some fluctuation in the grid, that factory, the units, the motors, or whatever using the power, they can behave very, not very good for the system. Basically, they're causing more problems, and that means that the operators, they have to have equipment in the grid taking care of that situation, the emergency services, if you wish. So by just having some rather simple requirements, saying, well, if you want to connect a big engine or a big motor to the system, to the power grid, you need to fulfill these requirements. You need to behave in this way if something happens in the grid. So you're helping the grid rather than making the situation worse. And this is something that can really help reduce the need for emergency services from EVN and NLDC.
Yeah, I mean,
Please.
can
go
I
ahead.
add a
Please
bit more
add.
on? So, of course, the growth of solar, especially in Vietnam, the last few years has been impressive. I think it's beyond the targets that were set by the government, so that speaks a lot to the policy support that the sector received. And it's really a very successful exercise. But of course, we all know that a lot of capacity that came up from these renewables are today not being able to be tapped. So it cannot be sold on the grid because of all the constraints that we have on the grid and stuff like that. So I just want to bring in a couple of points on the technology side because, of course, technologies can help to avoid some of these issues. Of course, the grid infrastructure is needed to transport the power from one location to the other. But at the same time, how do you decide where you want more renewables to come up? Do you know in advance what's the capacity that you have on the grid to connect to these renewables if they come up? And what kind of investments that you need in terms of the infrastructure that you need to be able to take power from these renewables? So today, these technologies are available in the market. So Schneider is also one of the supplier for these technologies. It's called DERMS. It's a distributed energy resource management system. So it not just allows you to control, monitor, and optimize your distributed energy resources, but also it's a platform for other stakeholders like aggregators or virtual power plants tomorrow who might come in and may want to participate in some kind of competitive bidding to sell their production or generation. So technology can go a long way, not just in helping you optimize the operations part, but also in terms of planning. So I think there's a lot of discussion that we are doing with EVN today locally, and some of my colleagues are here in this room who are part of these discussions to understand what are those technologies that they can put in place today in order to have a better visibility on how to evolve the distribution grid going into the future. Second, again, something that I would like to highlight is what are the things that can facilitate some of these renewable power to meet the needs of some of the manufacturers, some of the industries who today are looking for more greener sources of power. So things like direct PPAs. I see there was a session today morning or earlier on the topic. So these are things, these are levers that can definitely help in making sure the integration of the renewables happens. First in terms of grid investments, secondly in terms of, let's say, technologies that can help to better manage the resources that are already available. And thirdly is by providing the right incentives and the financial framework for different stakeholders to engage in this ecosystem. One of the, another example that we are talking to today with EVN again, it's a practical example that I want to share, is how they can have an actual representation of the network model. So today, what we call, I mean, it's a very popular term, we call it digital twin, but what it really means is that you build a digital equivalent of the physical network that you have so that you can do a lot of analysis, a lot of simulation, etc. on that network model. And then that in turn helps you to plan better. You know, it helps you to execute better whatever the plans that you have, that you are coming up with for the next foreseeable future. So these are some of the fundamental things that needs to be put in place that can help you navigate this complexity of building the network. We all know that in Vietnam, the power consumption is growing at 10, 12%. So there is going to be increasing demand for power. And this increasing demand of power has to come with more sustainable power, right? So for the distribution grid, that means more complexity. But do we have the technologies today to manage that complexity? My answer is yes. Has it all been implemented today in Vietnam? Not yet. EVN is looking very closely at some of these technologies to help them navigate and manage this complexity, but I believe it could go faster.
Thanks, Roy, for talking about terms so that I don't have to talk about that. From the grid point of view, what can we do more to add renewables? Let's break it down in short-term actions and mid-term actions. In the short-term actions, I definitely, let's go ahead and implement the Power Development Plan 8. As Philip mentioned in his slides, the plan is to add 90,000 MVA of 500 kV transformers in the next 7 years. To give you a perspective, we are talking about in excess of 90 to 100 units of 500 kV power transformers in the next 7 years. How many transformers has EVN NPT bought for 500 kV in the last 2 years? 2 units. So we need to expedite that ASAP. Then I'm not going to the 220 and the 110 kV because the same story replicates. Number 2, another low-hanging fruit, which Rasmus was mentioning earlier, grid code. It's there, and it's very, very, sometimes it's even more stringent than the Nordic grid code or UK grid code. However, it's not being enforced. I really wish that, and this is a joke, that the way the traffic police in Vietnam enforces the traffic law, even half of that, if we are enforcing the grid code compliance, as he was using the traffic analogy, we'll be having a much more resilient grid. These two are very short term. Nothing needs to be done. These are in the plan of the government and PDP 8. Number 3 would be adding ancillary services. That is something which is currently missing. Again, I'm extrapolating what Rasmus was saying. Time-based feed-in tariff, demand-side management, as Roy was mentioning, providing frequency voltage support. These services and the pricing for that is not yet implemented, and that needs to be done to add more renewables. Otherwise, it will not make sense. Never we will have competitiveness for storage system, because I read through Power Development Plan 8, and it mentions many times that we need to add battery energy storage system, and we will add it when it is affordable. Now, affordable is a very good word, but it doesn't specify what is the price that we are looking at. So it doesn't give a target for suppliers like us that where do we need to go? Storage is key. If I can give an example from our neighboring country, Philippines, I don't think that, and maybe my numbers are not accurate, but solar in Vietnam is almost 17,000 megawatt. I do not think that Philippines have even half of that in their grid. However, they have 1,000 megawatt of battery energy storage implemented in the last 4 years to support the grid. Maybe, and here I'm taking a long leap, Vietnam is only country which has already 22,000 megawatt of renewables without any battery energy storage system. That's not the only thing. We can have pump hydro, we can have other storage, but it's critical. Without storage, frequency, voltage regulation cannot be done. These are the short-term solutions, let's say. Mid-term, we definitely need, again, from Power Development Plan 8, it says to implement 40 to 60,000 megawatt of energy transmission HVDC network from 2030 to 2050 onwards. A lot of things in Vietnam happens very fast, just like the feed-in tariff for the solar and wind, and things just, like, I cannot believe that a wind project can be done in 9 months, but it was done in Vietnam and connected to the 500 kV grid. HVDC cannot be done that fast. It takes 8-9 years to build a network. This is known. So if we want to have these solutions, we need to start discussing, having specification, discussion right now to have it ready by 2031. So we are a little bit behind there. So yeah, that's my 2 cents. Implement the first low-hanging fruit of investment of PDP-8, grid code compliance, ancillary services, battery energy storage system, and the last one, HVDC. Yeah.
Thanks, Chandan. The analogies with traffic on transport seem to work really well here. Rasmus, you wanted to add on that one as well, before we then, I think, move on with opening the floor to the audience.
Yeah, impression sometimes that renewables, solar and wind, and maybe in particular wind, is like these dumb machines just being placed into the landscape or offshore soon here in Vietnam. And they produce when the wind is blowing, and they are just completely uncontrollable, and something that needs to be nursed like a little toddler. And this is pretty far from the truth. So there's a lot of cases demonstrating that offshore wind and onshore wind as well, even solar to some extent, can actually supply ancillary services, not things like black start and stuff like this, but frequency control, even voltage control to some extent, and is actually something that is quite easy to supply if requested, if required, and of course there has to be incentives. So a combination of some requirements and some incentives, and these technologies will help increase the stability of the grid, not decrease it. So in combination with the proper regulation and other technologies. So I think that's important to keep in mind.
Thank you. We have a couple of backup questions again, also on investment and the relation on or the potential of public and private entities cooperating and jointly developing the grid. But before coming to that, are there any questions in the audience? We have a rolling mic, I guess. Doesn't seem to be the case at the moment. Okay, coming back to this investment question and then the role of the private sector, knowing that there's some legislation being developed at the moment, investment laws being put forward by the National Assembly, allowing for private actors to invest in transmission. We also know that there's huge expectations in the international community within the JETP, especially on the GFAN side, private actors, international financial institutions wanting to invest into the grid. In parts, there's ODA regulations standing in the way, but then and also other regulations. From I know we have mainly now advisors on the energy planning, but also technology providers here on the panel today. But again, I'd like to hear your view on what's on the private side, what you think is needed, and what are potential success factors in order to allow the private sector to invest into transmission, but also to allow it to manage it in an efficient way. Maybe Chandan, you want to take that first one, and then
the question is very challenging. I can, if you allow me, I can state few challenges that as a technology provider I see at the moment. At least I can see 3 of them for private sector investment in the grid side. Number 1 would be very simple, no-brainer, that the cost of transmission in Vietnam is quite low, 70, 80 Vietnam dong per kilowatt hour. That's the lowest, that's even lower than India, and that says something. So return on investment will be a big challenge. That's number 1. Number 2, very big challenge which even EVN NPT faces, and EVN Ho Chi Minh and even Hanoi also faces, is land acquisition. So being state-owned entities, if they are not able to acquire land on time, you give it to a private, let's say, investor who has to acquire land over thousands of kilometers. We are taking a very big gamble there until unless the government does assure that the land would be provided as part and parcel. And the last one would be integration with the existing grid. As I was mentioning earlier, the grid code is not being enforced. So immediately there will be harmonic distortion, harmonic current distortion, challenges that the current grid will inject in the private grid. All these things does present challenges. At the same time, can this be done? For sure, for sure. There are in the region, and the previous panel it was being discussed, there are legislations which allows private player to come in, and I'm sure that with proper regulatory environment, even though I cannot see the business case, I'm sure that there are smarter people who can make a business case and do implement private grid in Vietnam, which will be very, very beneficial for the Vietnamese public, but also profitable in the long run, very sustainable as well.
anybody wants to add to that? Do we now have any questions from the audience? One question's over there with this gentleman. Thanks.
Yeah, I would like to ask a question that could you share your idea or your prediction that EVN will break down the electric cost to component and then charge the client accordingly in the future? Because many projects join into the grid of the nation. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for this question.
Can I ask you to rephrase it? I did not
Yeah.
understand it. Or maybe you can explain it to me if you can.
Maybe you can once again clearly repeat it. That would help the audience and us. Thanks.
Yeah. Now on the electricity we buy from EVN, and EVN in charge of the transmission power system. But if in the future new investor join into the market to generate power, so the electric user, do we expect that EVN will break down the cost of the electric and then charge to us?
If I may, I would like to help you
Please,
for
please.
that question, because it's about electricity law in Vietnam. And as I already mentioned about splitting, making the breakdown between the electrons and the transmission and distributions. For the moment, EVN is not allowed to make that breakdown. And we all are looking for that, because this would allow us to have the direct PPA charges that we are looking for transmission and distributions. And this is not in EVN decision, it's the National Assembly decision. So it's out of their control.
Many thanks for directly responding to that question.
Yes,
Important
thank you
point.
for that.
Anybody wants to add to that from the panel? Or- Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to ask you about how do you think about the potential of grid, interconnection grid in Vietnam to neighboring country? Two ways, on land and, interconnection and submarine HVDC. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I think Chandan is the first
Okay.
one to take on that one.
That's a very interesting concept of having interconnection grid, and as a grid technology provider, I can confidently say that if we have interconnected grid like the ASEAN has been envisioning for some years now, if not decade, a lot of challenges will be solved. We might not need to have energy storage. We might not need to have so much pump storage. Currently, we are buying power. So in this June, when we were suffering from power cuts, China came to Vietnam's help and supplied emergency power through 110 kV grid. Now that's already a challenge if we are buying power at 110 kV because it's not so efficient. The next challenge or the next opportunity comes from connecting our grid to Laos to buy power from monsoon. The target is to have, if I'm not mistaken, 3,000 megawatt from monsoon by 2025 and 5,000 by 2030. Again, here also we are trying to have our AC grid 500 kV connected to the monsoon power plant and have a grid from there. The third one, in the south, we are selling to Cambodia, almost, if I'm not mistaken, 380 to 400 megawatt of renewable power to Cambodia. Again, these grids are not synchronized. These grids are actually kind of a challenge that is presenting to Vietnam currently. There are technology existing which in European Union is being used to connect. So for example, maybe Rasmus can give more example how Denmark is connected to Norway and Sweden, and they are exchanging renewable power depending on which is surplus. There is a solution for that, and that is definitely going to be helpful. Coming to your last point on connecting countries through submarine cables. Technically, this can be done. At the same time, it comes at huge cost. To give an example, Prime Minister Chin and Prime Minister Lee made an agreement that Vietnam and Singapore will go into having offshore wind power from Vietnam Cha Vinh area to Singapore directly through undersea cables. The cost of putting undersea cable through HVDC technology will be so high that 1200 megawatt might not be enough to sustain that. So we are talking about huge cost when it comes to undersea cable. And undersea cable has an inherent disadvantage of limiting the current and the power that it can transmit. That is why having overhead line is still a preferable way to do it. And it can be done. It can be done. ASEAN has been studying this and having ideas about this for some years now. But thanks very much for the question. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so really good question, very interesting. And before I get into maybe explaining some experiences from Denmark, let me say that I think it's super relevant for Vietnam to look to its neighbors and have a good dialogue with them. Laos, I believe, is sometimes called the hydro battery of Southeast Asia. So they already have a lot of hydropower, but I believe they have a potential to even double or triple the amount of hydropower that they can generate, even without actually stopping the Mekong River. So that's a huge potential for Vietnam, I believe. And then let me convert that to the Danish experiences, because in Denmark, as you so rightly say, we've been quite fortunate we don't have any hydropower. Denmark is completely flat. It's very windy, so wonderful place to live. It is, apart from the weather, but so we got a lot of wind turbines, and luckily our rich neighbors to the north, Norway and Sweden, especially Norway, they have a lot of hydropower. And as you rightly say, well, sometimes they have too much hydro, the runoff river, they can't get rid of it. So we've had strong connections to Norway's forever. And actually we have connections to all over all our neighbors. We finished a 700 megawatt HVDC line to Netherlands this year, and in 2 years we'll inaugurate a 1400 megawatt HVDC line to UK. So again, exchanging power, and this is done almost exclusively by HVDC lines, since Denmark is composed of islands and peninsulas. So we have more than 15, I think, different connections, most of them HVDC lines. And that's another thing that I think is very relevant, and we're trying to also work with the Vietnamese on how to use HVDC in the grid, because even connecting from the central to the north, or connecting to other countries, if you want to go to Singapore with offshore wind, for example, the HVDC can be solutions, and HVDC not only makes it cheaper to transport electricity over long distances, but it can also really help your operation of the grid with the newest technologies. HVDC can really basically act as a very flexible power plant in your system. So it really supplements renewable energy in two ways. Yeah.
Just one more way of adding HVDC. HVDC has much lower transmission losses, the lowest possible, less than 1%. And to transmit the same amount of power over 1,000 kilometers, it takes less than 50% of the AC grid footprint in terms of metal, cable, everything, to do the same amount of power transformer. So it's more sustainable as well, greener.
Thanks. Yeah, I think we can see the relevance of interconnected grids, regionally interconnected grids, in order to take the next steps, ensure that there is sufficient energy supply, sufficient electricity supply, while further integrating renewables. We can also see that in Germany, country where I come from, with almost 50% of solar, wind, biomass in the electricity mix. And now taking the next steps, coming to 60, 70, 80%, really, there we really need to rely on the interconnection with other countries, but also, again, on storage. Storage will play a key role, and if we look at the PDP-8 and the storage, hydro storage resources in the country, which are limited, and the 300 megawatt BES being put forward, that is probably not sufficient. Looking at other scenarios, for example, from the Danes, where a lot more storage is being planned in BESS storage, in order to secure the system, in order to avoid a massive take-up of gas capacity in the 30s. What's your view, again, also coming from a grid technology provider perspective, on the role of storage, especially related to cost effectiveness, to market maturity, and the role in Vietnam over the next years?
I think last year I read about the energy island concept of Denmark, and that's amazing. That's already speaks a lot that can be achieved from the technology point of view. At the same time, from the pricing point of view, current prices in Vietnam for energy, electricity, is lowest in the region, barring Myanmar and Laos, because of the obvious, it's a hydro battery, we can say that. And it does not entertain demand side management at the moment, not having time-based feed-in tariff. The solar producers do not get any incentive to add energy storage to their projects currently. Until and unless there is incentive for the developers, investors, that they can sell more, get more tariff from EVN, developing energy storage in Vietnam would be challenging. Until unless we have some ODA funding, or which is another topic that you were mentioning that we have a challenge. There are two ways, according to me, that we can develop energy storage in the grid. Number one is the grid level, that we can add 100 megawatt, 100 megawatt each for voltage stabilization, frequency control. A lot of benefit comes from storage, a lot of benefit. It acts like a sponge, all the impurities is absorbed, and it gives you clean water. Let's talk like that. But that will be the expensive route. Another way is we provide incentive, the government makes some policies for incentive, and all the investors of solar and wind project make small contribution in their own yards on the storage side, and it will be also helping the grid more or less the same way. This will take away the burden of initial capex from EVN MOIT and distribute it over long run.
Thanks, Janan, on that point, and especially building that analogy to a sponge. Yeah? We in Germany, we have a company is called Sonnen, which means suns, and they have been building up first virtual power plants in some regions. So what they do is they interconnect thousands of households with household batteries in order to balance the grid. Yeah? And I think this is really also a direction that might be interesting for Vietnam. Rasmus, you want to also touch upon?
Yeah,
this topic?
maybe just quickly on storages and then the virtual power grids. In the studies that we do for the Energy Outlook report, we model with 3 different energy system models, basically coming closer and closer to the electricity grid with the different models. And we also look at storages, and we've updated the technology cost for it. And later this year, we'll be publishing our updated technology catalog for different storages technologies as well. But yeah, I completely agree that the cheapest sponge is always the natural ones. So definitely looking towards Laos again is a very cheap solution. But you can have some requirements or some difficulties, for example, in the distribution grid or even at transmission level. And if you do what we call value stacking, so you can say you have a problem in a local grid, it could be part of Hanoi, and you also have a problem maybe with absorbing solar generation on the larger level here in the north during the day. Then you can say, okay, we install a big battery somewhere in Hanoi, and that battery can both help the distribution grid and help with problems in the overall system. So it's all about value stacking, and if you do that, then battery storages could definitely see a rise in the next 5-10 years. And it's also part of the PDB8 to do a pilot and a test on it. And quickly on the virtual grids, I think that's super interesting, and it's really relevant to look into. Vietnam is one big system today. It's operated as 5 different regional grids, but there can be a lot more autonomous operation built into the system. So this is something I know that NLDC is working on, but also that the regional centers and the power companies can be working on and developing. I think right now they're focusing a lot on investments into the smart grids, getting it up and running, which is a big first step. I'm sure Roy knows more about the technology side of the distribution grid, but definitely this can really help improve the overall stability of the grid. Yeah.
Thank you for your insights. Are there any further questions from the audience? Yes, this gentleman, please.
I have one question regarding HVDC, and second question is about the HVAC. So HVDC, as the PDP put in the orientation period from 2031 to 50 is a number of HVDC projects, transmission projects, and converter substations. So, but what do you think about what's the voltage, optimal voltage level of jet HVDC for Vietnam case in the orientation period? This is an orientation period, so it can be changed anytime soon, I mean, in Vietnam. The first question, the HVAC question is related to the draft PDP implementation, which is planning up to 2030. So far, I understand that in Vietnam there was a revision of electricity law in 2021 to attract private and foreign investment into the HVAC transmission. But so far, if the HVAC transmission project is individual and separate, no private and foreign investment yet into transmission, into the non-core transmission business, because the core transmission is supposed to be done by EVN or EVN and PT, etc. So what do you think to be decided in Vietnam to attract the private and foreign investment into the HVAC transmission projects? If this is not linked to a solar farm or the wind farms, like the case of Trung Nam, for example. So this is two questions. Because in the PDP implementation, they put a lot of projects like to be implemented in the socialization way. Socialization mean they want to have private investment. To me, it's more like a wish. If the project is not feasible or foreign investment doesn't see it feasible, they don't invest in. So it's more like a wish, not a plan, in my personal view.
Thank you for these two questions. Chandan, you want to respond to that?
A lot of interesting comments you made, and perhaps apart from the HVDC voltage, you already answered the questions as well. But I will try to give my 2 cents wherever I can. Regarding the HVDC voltage, as you said, in the orientation period, we can have a different voltage and later on have a different voltage. Yes, we can, absolutely, from technology point of view. But again, then we are talking about adding new equipment, electrical equipment, when we change the voltage. Yeah. So it also depends on how far we are talking about. If the objective is to make a backbone network from central to the north, apart from the 3 circuits that is already planned for the AC, then 200 kV DC will also do the job. But if the objective is to transmit 40,000 megawatt as it is envisioned in the PDP-8, then it definitely makes sense to go around 400 kV and higher HVDC network. Much more efficient in that sense and is able to transmit more power from that point of view. Regarding HVAC question, yes, currently along with Trung Nam, Sun Thien, and one more company, I'm forgetting, have built 500 kV substations and small transmission line to connect to the EVN grid. They are doing this because they could not wait for EVN to build the power evacuation substation for them. However, what current government and the policy is thinking is to have a more investment, or let's say side investment in the grid is a noble idea to increase investment in the grid. It's not very clear from the policy point of view how liberal it would be for a company if you decide to invest. How will you be compensated for the land challenges? And how long will be the PPA? And who will sign the PPA? So these are few questions which are not yet clear for any business to come in and put a network. I know last year there was there's a company called Adani Transmission, which actually invested in HVDC connection to bring in power to the city of Mumbai. So it is profitable even for a private company to make an HVDC network for themselves and bring in more power and sell it. Again, it depends on the few challenges that I mentioned already. If we have more clarity there, it is definitely a business that can make sense in Vietnam. Yeah, I hope I answered.
Thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you very much to the audience. We've finally come to an end of this third panel. I want to thank the panelists and the audience. I think a very interesting discussion. So just to quickly conclude, I think we can all agree that the PDPH grid development targets are already quite ambitious, looking at all the different elements. And still, we also see that strong investment is needed, that public investment likely won't be sufficient to leverage and further accelerate the necessary grid development. The 15 billion standing public investment standing in the PDP8 probably or very likely need to be substantiated, and public-private partnerships can play a strong role for that. We heard about grid codes, about essential requirements to ensure that renewables, especially volatile renewables, can properly be integrated into the grid. Nice analogies with transport traffic and electricity traffic. But then again, also, I think it got very clear that one need to pull the interconnection opportunities in the region, also across borders, especially with countries with strong hydropower storage potential to help balancing the system. And also then to pave the way for solutions like virtual systems, virtual power plants, and the further uptake of battery energy storage at different scales. So with this, I would like to again thank you very much, and wish you an exciting afternoon and the rest of the week. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philip.